Hello crafty friends, welcome to today's video. Today we are going to be looking at lots of different ways to use Nuvo drops and the like. Before we get into that though, I thought I'd show you my Nuvo drop collection, and if you want to know how to make perfect Nuvo drops almost every time, then I do have a video all about that, which I will link in the eye up there and in the video description below. So let's have a look at my little stash. I don't have many, but what I do have I use a lot. This one is my favourite. It's pale gold Nuvo crystal drops, and as it says on the pot, it's pale gold. Really pretty. I'm not a fan of bright brassy golds. I like a pale gold. I've got copper penny. It's another metallic one, a Nuvo crystal drop. I've got a silver. This was another charity shop find. That's the kind of thing I'd probably use on Christmas cards. Gold is for everyday. Copper is for steampunk and vintagey stuff, and silver is for Christmas, in my mind anyway. I've got black. That's a crystal drop as well. It's not metallic, but it's very glossy. I've got white, again a crystal drop but not metallic, it's just glossy and white. I've got this one, had this one for years, used it almost to the very end now. This is a Nuvo glitter drop and it is white blizzard. It's clear but has some iridescent glitter in it. It's a bit of a pain to get out because it's so old, it's on its last legs. I need to unclog the nozzle a bit and probably just buy a new bottle. But once it's dry, it's clear with tiny little bits of glitter. Another favourite that I use a lot is another crystal drop called Morning Dew. And this is clear, completely clear. It comes out cloudy, but it dries absolutely clear. It looks like water droplets or glass droplets. Now I do have these two Dovecraft 3D enamel effects. These came to me in a D-stash box. They're not something I would have necessarily bought, although I do particularly like the pink one. But the green one is a little bit fluorescent for me. But I'm not going to get rid of them because I will find a way to use them, as you will see in this video. And here we have Nuvo Crystal Glaze, which is completely clear again. It comes out a bit cloudy, a bit yellow, but it dries clear. It's runnier than your regular Nuvo drop and tends to flatten out more. And I've got a couple of small bottles of glossy accents. Again, one was a charity shop find. I think it's that one because it doesn't come out as easily. I need to top up my glossy accent stash, I think. Again, it's clear, but it comes out cloudy, slightly yellow, but it does go clear. And again, it's a bit runnier than, say, the Morning Dew Nuvo drop. So I tend to use glossy accents and crystal glaze for flooding large areas, and the Morning Dew for more defined gloss. Nuvo drops aren't the only kind of drops. There's the Dovecraft ones. I think Ranger do some. Scrapbook.com do some. There's a whole host of liquid drops that you can get, and you can get them in a whole range of colours, a whole range of finishes. But now I'm going to demonstrate some ways to use this type of product regardless of manufacturer, brand. Just play with what you've got and try out a few things. So the way you'll see me use Nuvo drops most often is to sprinkle them on as little embellishments, little dots, a bit like splashes of paint that are dimensional, sometimes random, sometimes regular, but that's how I use them the most. I just sprinkle them on. Normally you'll see me put my Nuvo drops straight onto my card, usually as a finishing touch, but you can prepare them in advance. You can take something non-stick like a piece of acetate or some craft sheet, and you can put your drops on and then set them aside somewhere where you're not going to put your fingers in them and leave them to set, and then they will peel off really easily from the thing you've put them on, and you can glue them using a bit of regular PVA glue or what have you to stick them where you want them. Sometimes if you put Nuvo drops on inked paper, something you've inked with, say, Distress Oxides, the drops can absorb some of the ink and it actually changes their colour. But if you pre-make them on acetate, say, and then glue them onto the inked paper, they won't absorb the colour because they've already set and dried. There's no absorption going on. So that's one advantage of pre-making your Nuvo drops. Another is that I find when I put them on acetate and leave them to set, they spread out a little bit further than they do when they're put on paper. So they look more like actual enamel dots, the kind you buy from shops. Another way that I've used Nuvo drops in the past is to paint them on. Take a paintbrush, preferably an old inexpensive one, and put some Nuvo drops on your mat, pick it up with the paintbrush and brush it on. And you can layer this up. You can brush on a thin layer, leave it to dry a bit, add another layer, create some texture because the texture will stay in the Nuvo drops as they set. Once you've done this, definitely wash out your paintbrush, and I think this can make a really nice backdrop to a focal point. Or you could die cut from it once it's set. Nuvo drops aren't as thick as texture paste, but you can stencil with them. Put a little bit of the drops on your mat, pick it up with a palette knife, and then gently push it through a stencil onto card blank or a die cut or something. Set it aside to dry, and you will be left with some really pretty, slightly dimensional stenciled shapes. Believe it or not, you can also smoosh with Nuvo drops. Again, pop a bit on your palette or glass mat or what have you, and pick it up with a smoosher. I'm using my mini smoosher here, and I'm getting a lovely, delicate, thin, ethereal layer of pale gold lusciousness. You can put the drops on a palette and pick them up with your smoosher, or you can put the drops straight on the area where you want to smoosh and smoosh away. As well as smooshing on your Nuvo drops, you can brayer them on. Put a little bit on your mat again, roll your brayer through it to coat the brayer, and then brayer it on to your card panel or card blank or die cut or whatever. And again, you can put the drops straight on the card and squish them out with your brayer. Clean your brayer afterwards though, because you don't really want your Nuvo drops drying on your brayer. Again, this would make a really nice background to a focal image or a focal die cut. If you want something really textural and luscious, then just spread it on with a palette knife. It almost looks a bit like butter, I think, but don't eat it. And if you want something even more textural, then you can scratch into the Nuvo drops that you have smeared, spread, brayered, what have you, onto your card. Just using a pokey tool here, but have a rummage around your craft room, your kitchen, your office, and see what you could use to scratch some marks into your Nuvo drops. Again, a nice little foundation for a focal point or even to die cut from. If you apply your Nuvo drops in a relatively thin layer, say with a palette knife like this, you can press marks into them. So I've got here a rubber stamp and I'm pressing it down into my smear of Nuvo drops, and the texture will stay there as it dries. You could try this with embossing folders too. I think the trick is to have a relatively thin layer. A really fun way of using these kind of products is just to squish them. So squirt some on a bit of paper or card, put another bit of paper or card over the top and squish it down. You could roller it with your brayer, open it up before it has a chance to dry or to set, and then leave it somewhere to set. And this gives you a really textural finish that you can use in all sorts of ways. One of those ways is to die cut shapes from it. For this demo, I used a flower die and cut some little flower shapes, which I then layered up to make some dual layer flowers out of the purple one. I could then cut some leaves from the greeny one that I did and use those behind the flowers. Another thing you can do with Nuvo drops is to create flower centres. You've seen me do this a lot. I'll make some flowers and then I'll add a little drop of an appropriate colour into the centre. As well as die cutting shapes from paper that you've coloured with Nuvo drops, you can take blank die cuts and colour them with Nuvo drops. So here, all I did was squirt some of the green drops onto my die cut, and then I spread it across it with a bit of card. You could use a paintbrush, and then I set it aside to dry. And similar to creating flower centres with Nuvo drops, you can use them to add bodies to your butterflies or other insects. Sometimes I just run a line of Nuvo drops along a body of a butterfly. Sometimes I make individual drops and let them merge together, as I did here. You could also use these liquid drops to fill holes or apertures in die cuts. So I die cut a butterfly and stuck it on a piece of white card. I then squirted over some of the purple drops and then spread it out with a bit of card to push the drops into the holes to fill up the holes. And then I put another butterfly, a pink pearlized butterfly, on top to hide any messiness. I didn't wait for my drops to dry, but it is probably a good idea to let the liquid drops dry before you try putting a die cut on top of them. But once everything was dry, I cut out my butterflies. So now I've got two butterflies, also with bodies, and the apertures in their wings filled with gloss and colour. Instead of backing your die cut with cardstock, you can also back your die cut with acetate with some clear plastic, and then fill your die cut apertures with drops, preferably translucent ones, and then you will end up with a kind of stained glass effect as shown here. Right, I think we're on to idea number 16. And that's to combine in a line. I laid down a line of copper penny Nuvo drops, and then I added a dot of white Nuvo drop in between the copper pennies and let them touch, and these will slowly merge into a line. And as you can see, you can just do straight lines like this, or you could do heart shapes, circles, squares, frames, whatever you fancy. It does take a bit of a steady hand, but practice makes progress. You can also write and draw with Nuvo drops. Again, this takes a bit of a steady hand. If you squeeze the bottle gently but evenly, you can get a regular-ish flow of drops out of the bottle and use that to draw or write. If you found getting an even flow too difficult, you could do the previous technique, combine in a line, draw or write in individual dots, and then fill in the spaces in between. And that's quite an easy way of drawing or writing with Nuvo drops. Just do combine in a line. For this technique that I've called outline a shape, I washi taped a die to my card panel, and I'm using it as a guide to help me get my first row of Nuvo drops in as perfect a circle as I possibly can. And then I'm just going around and adding more drops to create a really textural, satisfying starburst effect, I guess. Speaking of stars, I also did this with a star die. And you could use any shape. You don't even need to use a die if you can do it freehand, or you could use some kind of mask, anything just as a little guide. So you can create that first line of drops, which you can use as a foundation for the rest of the pattern that you apply. As well as outlining a shape with the drops, you can fill a shape with the drops. So I've got here a circle stencil that I've washi taped onto a piece of pink cardstock, and I went around the inside edge with the drops and then filled the middle with various size drops. I would recommend leaving the mask in place or the stencil in place until the drops have dried, but if you're impatient like me, just remove it really carefully. Of course, you don't just have to outline shapes or fill in shapes. You could create whole pictures with your Nuvo drops. You could go full pointillism and create some beautiful patterns, beautiful images, just with dots of different colour. And our last technique for today is to sprinkle glitter on your Nuvo drops, your crystal glaze, your glossy accents, and leave it to set. Once it's set, you can shake your glitter off or waft it off, and you will have some lovely dimensional, glossy, glittery drops or shapes. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you some ideas of things to do with your Nuvo drops or whatever similar product that you have. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up, let me know in the comments, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you back here very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.